Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully everybody got their Grubhub gift cards. There is nothing better than soggy French fries. Welcome to today's webinar. This is part one of our Getting Back to Work series. This is actually our Encore presentation as we broadcasted part one earlier this week on Monday. And today's conversation is going to be data center focused. My name is Dennis Walker. I wear a few different hats for IntegraONE. I'm the director of our recruiting offering. I'm the office manager down in our Fort Washington office, and I'm also an account manager. So let's jump into what we're going to focus on today. So today's discussion is going to include data center, security, and managed services, and specifically developing data center crisis management strategies and managing remote data, bringing that data back onto our corporate servers. And after the first part of this presentation, we're going to open up the floor to questions from you. And if you have any questions while our engineers are talking, on the right side of your screen, you'll see a chat tab. Please just enter any questions you have in there, and we'll address them in the second part of the presentation. Let's take a look at who's going to be presenting for us today. Jim Beddix is our Director of Server and Storage, and Jim is actually recognized throughout North America as one of the top HPE engineers. Jim's been with IntegraONE for 18 years this month, actually, so happy anniversary to Jim Beddix. Al Kale is our security practice manager. Al's been with IntegraONE for 4 years. He's a certified ethical hacker and a certified security analyst. Thanks for joining us today, Al. And Joe Consolmagno. Joe is the head of our managed service operation. Joe's been with IntegraONE also for 4 years and has 10 years of experience in the MSP space. Joe, thanks for joining.
Hey,
so let's
Dennis,
get into, oh yeah.
Sorry, Dennis, real quick. We're having some go-to meeting issues. I think it might have given Jim the boot here. Let's give him 1 second.
That would be tough to get our first question started then.
On the brakes, just a tad.
As Jim gets ready to come back on, we're going to start with managing your data center in a lights out capacity, is what we're going to talk to him about.
I've got the sidebar going on here. Apologies, everyone.
Hi, everyone. The man or the women behind the curtain, as it may be, is jumping in here. Kat Tuttle, I'm the Marketing Communications Manager with IntegraONE. While we're waiting for Jim, I just wanted to jump in with some of the housekeeping items that we were going to review at the end of the webinar here. Might as well use the time. So first off, we will be sending out a quick feedback survey at the very end of the webinar by email today. That'll include the recording of today's webinar in case you wanted to go back and review any of the details that were talked about today. And also it'll give you a chance to give us some feedback about the webinar format, anything that you'd like us to address in future webinars. And of course, if you have any questions for our presenters, you can enter those into the survey as well. Then, coming up, as Dennis mentioned, this is actually an encore presentation of part one of a webinar series on getting back to work. So today is going to focus on data center. Part two of the series actually is a little bit more networking focused. So if you're interested in that aspect of getting back to the office, part two of our webinar series is also going to have an encore presentation, and that'll be next Wednesday on the 13th from noon to 1. So if you haven't already attended that webinar, I would certainly encourage you to sign up if you like what you hear today. And you can also access all of our events and check out a little bit more detail at integraone.com/events.
Thanks, Kath.
You're very welcome.
And Jim, welcome back.
Thanks. Sorry about that, guys. Apparently, the webinar decided it wanted to start without me today. So we'll pick up right where we left off.
I'd like to repeat happy anniversary. Tremendous 18 years.
Thank
you. So the first thing we want to talk about, Jim, timing's perfect. So focusing on data centers and a crisis management strategy. So can you talk a little bit about how these companies should manage their data center in a lights out capacity?
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. One of the things that happened when, everything started changing and we moved to the work from home model, people pretty much scrambled, left the office as quickly as they could. And we realized that, we probably didn't leave things necessarily in the best mode for access. So now as we're starting to get back to normal, hopefully very soon, and people are returning to the office, one of the things to think about is how could you, sort of future-proof yourself should something like this happen again? And one of the best things to do is start thinking about managing your data center in a more of a lights-out mode. So, under normal operation, the data center could have been down the hall from you, right behind you. You could walk into it, look at servers, look at storage, check what's happening. Now that's totally different. Everybody's working from home. Your data center is separate from you, but you still need to manage and maintain it as if you were there. So one of the things that I like to think about here is break it down into basically two areas. One is access, and the other is availability of your data center. So let's talk about access first. So obviously in a lights out capacity, one of the first things that we want to do is kind of return that level of access that you were used to when you were in the office. So we want to try and get you as close to the data center as possible without you being physically there. So one of the easiest ways to do that for server resources is generally through a remote console. So every server vendor has a different name for what they call this. We deal a lot with HPE. HPE calls this integrated lights out, ILO. So, basically this allows you to act as if you're standing in front of that server with a crash cart or a console. You can physically power on the server, power it off. You can actually mount media as if you were there putting CDs or DVDs into the drive. And you can actually see the console and watch the server boot, right? So, every vendor sort of has some spin on this, some a little better, some a little worse. ILO is very full feature. The one thing that you do want to think about, though, is you may need a license to actually do these features. So from an HPE perspective, that's called the ILO Advanced License. It's generally something that when we quote out servers, we include it because we see a big value for it, but not everyone does. And what's nice is right now, actually, if you do have HP servers and they all have an ILO port on them, but you don't have that license, HP is actually giving away a free license that's good until the end of the year, December 31st. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us. We can give you a hand getting that installed. But that's the first level of access, right? Restoring that server access as if you were in the data center. What's great about that, but doesn't usually extend to some other devices, is that physical connectivity. So when we think about other devices like network switches or possibly storage arrays, we don't have that same level of management processor usually that we can act like we're right in front of it. However, most of those products do have a serial console on them for management. So what's coming back around now, we used to use these a lot back in the day. They sort of fell out of favor, but in this type of a model, it might be something worth a second look, is something that's either known as a console server or a serial concentrator. So basically what this allows you to do again is across the network, make a connection to this device, and then this device has a bunch of serial ports that you can plug into your switches, your storage arrays, and such. So it's, again, like you rolled up with your laptop and that serial cable plugged in and have access in front of or directly into that storage or networking device. So very similar to what we can do with the ILO, we can do with these serial consoles. Last part about this is, think about how you're going to actually get to those devices, be it the ILO or the serial console, when you're actually working from home. So here at Integra, we heavily rely on VDI, virtual desktops. It's a very simple way to connect in from any device into your network. You can generally do it without installing any client software on your device. And it allows me to then access those products to give me what I need to act like I was in the data center. The second part of that, though, is don't rely on just one method. Have more than one method to get into that data center for access. So while I primarily work in VDI, I also have a VPN connection. And that makes it very helpful when I do need to do maintenance, say, on the VDI environment, where if I was inside that environment, it becomes difficult to take it down and do maintenance because I would disconnect myself. Having that second or possibly third way to get in allows me to manage and maintain the environment and take down my primary method of access when I need to. So switching gears here, the next part about this, I would say, is availability, right? So obviously, you always want your data center up and running, but now more than ever, it's actually even more important because of everyone working remotely. Everyone's relying on those resources to be there. So when I look at availability, I start sort of at the ground level, and the first thing I would think about is power, right? Most folks, in a computer room in a data center, you've probably got your equipment on a UPS, a battery backup. But really, when's the last time you tested the UPS? When's the last time that you had the battery switched out? Those batteries aren't good forever, right? So if you haven't done some of those maintenance aspects on that infrastructure, now's a really good time when we get back to the office to try that out. The last thing you want to do is when you're miles away and have very limited access to your equipment, have it fail because of something simple like a battery that could have been replaced. Moving one step up the power food chain, in a rack mount environment, a lot of times most customers will have things called power distribution units or PDUs. What we see a lot is people buy these things, they treat them like extension bars, extension strips, if you will, or a surge bar. They have these basic flavors that basically just take an outlet and give you 10 or 15 more that you can plug into. However, there are more intelligent models of PDUs that are available out there. You may want to consider looking at a monitored or a switched even PDU. The switched PDU, the nice part again, has a management interface that you can log into. And now individually, outlet by outlet, I can cut the power or restore the power to an outlet. So for the servers, for example, I said I could out of band turn that server on or off through the remote console, through, on HPE, the ILO. But I can't do that for the devices like a network switch or potentially a storage array. So while I have access to them through maybe a serial concentrator, if I need to physically cut the power to that device for any particular reason, I can't do it. With a switched PDU, I can. So again, just restoring a level of access and availability into the environment. Last thing related to power is, a generator, right? So UPS batteries are great. They last and usually get you through what you need, but there's times where you're going to have an extended power outage. Having a generator is another thing that you should really look at. And if the data center you're in or the building you're in doesn't support that, you may also want to consider looking at a Colo. Here at IntegraONE, we actually went through this exercise a number of years back when Hurricane Sandy came through. Our main office in Allentown, we don't have the ability to put a generator in. And because of that extended window where we had no power, moving forward from there, we decided we were moving all of our equipment to a Colo. The nice part about being in the Colo, all the stuff I just talked about, testing the generator, testing the UPS, having access to those switch PDUs, that's all covered by the Colo provider. So now I've got everything taken care of and it makes my life a lot easier. The other thing that they can do for you and something to consider, when I was talking about multiple methods of access, you may also want to consider that if you're relying on the internet to come in, having multiple internet providers. Again, at your office or your location, that might not be feasible, but in a Colo, that's usually something that's very easy to do. Multiple providers are in there, and you can have a circuit that if one of the providers is down, you simply come in through another one. So a lot of good reasons to potentially look at a Colo still with your equipment in there, and still giving you that lights out access, but giving you just the peace of mind of not having to worry about some of these pieces. The next thing I would take a look at is phone home capability for your equipment. Almost every provider of hardware today has some level of phone home built into their equipment. Sometimes it's right in, sometimes it's an extra piece of software you need to add as a go-between. But really what's important about this is today, if you're not in front of your data center and a piece of equipment fails, how are you being notified and how is a part being ordered to be replaced? When you're down the hall and you can go look every day to see if there's an amber light because something failed, it's not such a big deal. But when you're at home and you can't see that, now it becomes more important. So most of these vendors, like I said, phone home is built in. We see a lot of folks don't actually configure that. So you definitely want to double check, do you have phone home capability on your equipment? If you do, is it properly configured? Most times there's an easy way to test that right from in the phone home setup. So make sure it's working. At the same time, make sure all your contracts are up to date, right? So people pay for these warranties, these uplifts. The phone home enables that, getting you those parts. But if you have the wrong contact information on the contract, wrong address, wrong contact person, email address or phone number, it's just going to cause more problems and slow things down. So again, now is a great time to go out there and take a look at those things. Make sure you have the right information on those contracts. Make sure that phone home is enabled, so that as we get back to work here, you don't have to worry about that going forward. Last piece of this, I would say, is something that's a little bit newer in the marketplace today, but it's something that's gaining a lot of traction. Monitoring and analytics, right? So, phone home is great for, I've got a failed piece of hardware, hard drive went bad in the server, order me a new one. Perfect. But what I need to know a little bit more now is when I'm not in front of the equipment or in front of the systems all the time, it would be great to have something that's sort of doing an overwatch on them and reaching out and telling me, hey, something's anomalous. You might want to take a look. Try and keep the environment up and running as much as possible. So one example of that is HPE Info Site. So along with the phone home information from your HPE servers or HPE storage, it can actually check into Info Site, and Info Site can look at what firmware you're running, what drivers you're running, and make recommendations to keep your environment up to date and up and running ahead of time before something fails. So definitely take a look if you have access to that. I have a great story here. We're going through this just like everybody else. We have some folks at Integra that one of their job roles is actually to scan in documents. And when they were in the office, they used the network attached scanner. It was properly configured that when they would scan these documents in, they were saved as PDFs. Went right on the network, everything was fine. We shifted from a work from home. They started scanning documents at home. They were using their own devices, their own software. They didn't realize they were actually scanning these documents in as photos, and they were taking up 10 times the amount of space as when they were scanning them in the office. So all of a sudden, we're starting to see this increase on our storage volume for all these documents that are being scanned. InfoSite pings me, says, hey, you're running out of space on the volume. Go look and see what's going on. I found out what was going on there. We were able to correct what was going on with those users. So, having that level of monitoring and analytics, besides having the phone home for just part failures, is very, very important. So I think, Dennis, those are some great ideas that people can take back to the office with them when they return, look at their environment, and maybe make some improvements or at least check things out to see that they're ready the next time around.
Yeah, thanks. That was fantastic. Gave everyone a lot to think about. So let's move on to the importance of backup and recovery solutions. We've got a decent amount of customers who are actually coming back to us now saying, oh my gosh, my systems haven't been backing up for a long time. My backups aren't working correctly, and they're realizing the importance of I need to be able to, pull that information back down if something happens. So can you talk a little bit about that, the importance around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, related to this, unfortunately, we're seeing an uptick in a lot of phishing and ransomware attacks related to the whole COVID-19 scenario. And people are finding out, really the only way around some of those things is to restore from backup. So to your point, if you have not been monitoring your backups, that's something you should definitely be doing. Almost every backup software out there is going to be able to alert you via email for a job being successful or a job being failed. We see a lot of times that customers don't have these things configured. Go back, take a look at that, make sure that's configured, make sure that you're able to see when a job fails and understand why right away, be able to make changes right away, because finding out 30 days later that you haven't had a good backup for a month when you need to go and restore something because you got hit by ransomware is probably the worst feeling in the world, right? On top of that, some backup packages, we deal a lot with Veeam. They have some advanced reporting and analytics. Veeam One Reporter is really good at telling you, what's going on with the backup environment, if there's systems that haven't been backed up, how long, if there's interesting things going on, if it's a VMware environment in particular, have your backups started growing larger than they normally were. Again, looking out for things like unexpected storage growth or something happening on the wire or on the server. So, they can also look they have some built-in checks for ransomware. It's interesting. It sort of monitors the activity on the server, looks for the creation of encrypted files, and can send you an alert and email you right away, say, hey, go take a look at this box. So some advanced features and functionality that are being provided by a lot of the backup vendors for, this type of a scenario that's very helpful. The other thing that you may want to start to consider is offsite or multiple copies of your backup. We talk a lot about like a 3-2-1 strategy, 3 copies of your data, 2 different locations, one of them being AirGap. If you're not doing that now, this is a good time to take a look at that strategy and think about how you could implement that. That one AirGap copy could be something, as mundane as a tape. A lot of people that are doing backups try to get away from doing tape copies, but believe it or not, it's a great way to do a really cheap AirGap copy. Another way to do that is to a device that's not on the wire with a standard protocol. So, for example, a lot of people that are doing disk-based backups write their backups right out to a NAS device. That's great. It's very cost-effective. It's a great way to run your backups at good speed. But the downside to that is that device is on the wire just like any other file server or workstation. So it's susceptible to anything that can come across the wire and attack it, like ransomware. So, again, purpose-built backup devices that don't use those traditional protocols necessarily. For example, again, my background being in HPE and HPE Store Once talks a Catalyst protocol. It's not available like a regular file server. So it's basically immune to the ransomware attack. So it's a great way to have that AirGap copy. Lastly, we get a lot of questions about, well, what about an offload to the cloud? That's a third way that you could definitely get your data AirGap. We have a lot of relationships. Again, depending on your backup software, you may be able to do this multiple ways. Veeam, sort of like a Swiss Army knife. We can send it up to Cloud Connect partners. We could send it up to Azure. We could send it up to AWS. A lot of different options there. The important thing is understand what options you do have. Take a look at how your backups are running today. And if you don't have those AirGap copies or you don't have good backups happening, work to address that right away.
Awesome. Thanks. So, Joe, this is a question for you, piggybacking off of the same topic. From a managed service offering, what can you talk about? What can our customers do if they say, I don't want to manage my backups, I want someone else to manage it? What can we offer? What can be offered from a managed service perspective?
Yeah, we've been selling a product line called GuardNet for about a decade now, where we manage our customers' backup. So we take on all of that responsibility. So we're installing software, building that package that will copy to an on-site device, whether it be a NAS or put a VDR on site. The NAS is just capable of doing file and folder recoveries. VDR on site will be able to virtualize any and all the servers. So if you have a server that dies, we'll get a notification of it. We'll call you and say, what do you want to do? Do you want to try to attempt to bring the server on site back up online, or do you want us to virtualize you on site? So decisions made there in just a couple of minutes because we'll be notified of it, because we'll be monitoring the server and we'll be monitoring the backups. And both of those would fail in the event of a server failing. On top of that, we'll also be copying that data off site. The on-site backup is every 15 minutes. and then we can copy offsite as often as the customer wants. The minimum time is 3 times a day, and then we can expand from there and keep your data in the data centers for a longer term. And then the options for our clients are also file and folder only in the cloud or virtualization in the cloud. So if you lose your whole site, we can virtualize you out in the data center, run you for up to 30 days at no cost other than the monthly number that you've already signed up for, and have you up and running, set up VPNs, whatever the case may be for what your business needs are. So all of that's managed by us. So the backups on site, making sure it gets off site, and then we're also doing tests. So if you have a BDR on site, which is the higher level of service, our guys will remote in on a weekly basis and test your backups. So if something fails, it can't virtualize, we'll look into it and see what the error message would be. And that just gives confidence to our customers when they get that notification, every Sunday or whatever the case may be for what they're set up, that, hey, your Exchange server virtualized or one of your DCs virtualized, or it'll be at random. That way we grab all the servers over a time frame.
Great. Thanks, guys. So let's move on to managing remote data files and migrating the information back to on-premise. And Jim, we'll start with you again. Just some things to think about as people start to come back to the office and bringing that information back onto our network.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. So really the way that you're going to deal with getting any content that was created during this whole event back on your network is probably going to vary based on the device that the user is creating the content on, right? So we've got some devices that maybe were owned by the organization, given to the users to take home, a company assigned laptop maybe. And depending on what the company is doing, they may already have some sort of file sync in place. It could be something like Microsoft OneDrive or a Google Drive, right? If that was already on the device, the nice part is you probably don't have to do too much. It was probably configured by your corporate admin. The data that you've been creating and saving has been being synced up to that. And when you get back to the office, it'll pull it right back down. So that's one method that's possibly already in play where you really don't have much to do, which is great. If you didn't have one of those utilities installed, but it's still on a corporate asset, they may have configured something as simple as Microsoft offline files. So very, very similar. Any content that you're creating in the folders that they've designated for offline use, when you come back to the wire, it's going to go ahead and pick those things up and copy them back to the network file server. However, there's a lot of cases where people don't have an asset that was provided to them. They're using their own PC, their own tablet, whatever they may have at home to continue and work from home. So in that case, you're probably saving data that is not going to be automatically copied back. You're going to need to probably fall back on old-fashioned sneakernet, some sort of removable device like a hard drive or a USB stick. You're going to have to keep track of where you created that content, copy it there, and then when you go back to the office, upload those copies to the appropriate place on the network file server potentially. Lastly, some organizations do allow, even if it's a home user and they didn't have, the corporate file sync utility on, it might be something like Box or Dropbox that you could have signed up for, and it might be a way to move that data back and forth short of the sneakernet or the removable device. But we need to be really careful no matter what we do there, whether you're copying the data up or one of these file sync things is copying it. There's a chance that if it was an endpoint that was not controlled by the organization, that endpoint didn't have proper antivirus software or proper updates applied to it, you may be bringing malicious content with you back into the network. So I know, Al's on here to talk about some of the security stuff. We'll talk a little bit about, what could happen as people copy these files back up, some ways you can mitigate some problems. But it's an interesting solution. It's a problem that everybody's probably going to have at some level. And the last part that I'll mention here, I talked a little bit earlier about VDI, that we use it heavily. One of the reasons that we use it so heavily is when an end user connects in through VDI, they're presented a virtual desktop that's basically inside the organization. So whenever they're creating content inside that VDI session, it's being saved right on the network. where it would normally be on if you were in the office. The other part is those VDI sessions have antivirus on them, have Windows updates applied. They're getting those things constantly. So if your endpoint, was locked down and it's not on the corporate network and the update policy is not applying, that's a challenge. But in VDI, that's live. It's on the wire all the time. So it's one of the reasons that we leverage it very heavily. Folks that were VDI adopters prior to the whole work from home pandemic response, basically we're able to pivot right away. We were able to tell everybody, hey, just go home. Here's your login. As soon as you log in, it's going to look just like you're in the office. People that didn't have VDI, these are the ones that are really fighting right now to figure out what am I doing for syncing data back up that was created when people were out of the office. So Al, with that, I'll kick it over to you to talk about some of the things that you can do about sanitizing or quarantining some of those files when you come back into the office.
Sure. Thank you, Jim. As you mentioned, you hit some key points, right? As you're synchronizing or, grabbing that data to store it back on the servers, question comes up, what's stored on the endpoint, right? Is the data good? Is it bad? Is there anything malicious? You really don't know, depending on your device visibility, right? You also mentioned, is there endpoint protection installed, right? What could be possibly be coming back onto my network? So we definitely want to make sure that we sanitize devices as they come back, depending on what that visibility was. I'll throw a similar scenario here. I've got a corporate endpoint. I've got a whole slew of endpoint protection products, right? Because we're consulting. I should be well protected. Now, on the other hand, every once in a while, my daughter and I, we watch videos on YouTube, children's stuff. Now, what happens when the day comes when she's actually on my laptop, right, firing up a web browser, trying to get to YouTube? There's probably a good chance that she's going to be clicking on things that she shouldn't. That's a real possibility, right? So if my computer becomes infected and I don't know it, and then all of a sudden I'm traveling back to the office, I need to make sure that the computer is safe. There isn't malicious content on there before I'm actually connecting back to those corporate resources. So, ensuring that the endpoints are sanitized, there's nothing bad on them, definitely critical as you're bringing the devices back and getting back to work.
Thanks, Al. What about as far as changing security policies when people left the office and now that they're coming back, having to adjust those policies? And in the situation that we're potentially looking at where half the office comes back, half stays home, how do you handle security policies and adjusting how everyone can access the network?
Sure. Double whammy there, right? So COVID-19, changes were made. We had to poke through, holes through the firewall, to allow, say, remote access. Cases where maybe VDI was or wasn't, available. Regardless, the users went home. They had to get back to the servers. So now we've got a firewall with a broken security policy, right? That could be, allowing threats to attack it. Likewise, so on the other hand, we want to have some of the users come back into work. Meanwhile, others are still working remotely. We still have to keep those relaxed security policies in place. So, how do we handle that? Well, on one hand, if users are all coming back to the office, it's no longer needed. We definitely got to make sure that we review all those security policies to make sure they're locked back down, right? Don't leave any, open holes and accept unnecessary risk. It's not worth it. Now, if users are still working remotely and it is a requirement still, maybe we can bundle additional, security on top. For users that have to access the server and a firewall rule was open to allow it. Can we pop on multi-factor authentication, moving forward? This way we have an additional layer there. Do we have a next-gen firewall? Can we enable any rules, IPS, WAF, or web app firewall? Can we add, additional protection to keep those rules in place? Regardless of the situation, we want to ensure that we're thoroughly reviewing those security policies to make sure there's no, open holes left behind.
Right. Thanks, Al. Joe, this is coming back to you. and how can the managed service offering help companies manage different layers of security?
Yeah, so we have a managed security offering as well. So what we've been doing with some of our customers is deploying a SIM. So what the SIM does is it picks up all of the logs that are happening on endpoints, whether it be servers, desktops, networking devices, and puts them all into one centralized location, and then all of that stuff is parsed. So your device is creating thousands of logs a day. A lot of those things are nothing, but when something strange happens in those logs, that's when we jump and that's when we alert the customer. When users started to go from home, we started seeing applications being installed on these customers that are enrolled in this program that are foreign to that environment. So software for soft phones or software that they needed to work from home, we started getting alerts that, hey, this is the first time this application got introduced into this environment. Do you want it here? And then we would reach out to the main contact at the site and let them know, and we blacklisted or whitelisted from there. But having more eyes into what's happening in the environment as customers started to go home was very important. And now that they're coming back in, we can start to strengthen those things, as Al said. But grabbing all those logs and having it there for up to 365 days is important. That way, if something did happen, something strange did happen in the environment, we now have it logged, and we can go back to it and say, hey, this is the point of where things went bad, and start to roll back our backups, whatever the case may be.
Thanks, Joe. So I think as far as topics that we wanted to cover as a team, we've pretty much gone through them all. At this point, we want to open this up to questions, any questions that came through while you guys were talking or questions that we got prior. And I see Kat is joining us again.
Yep, I'm back, Dennis.
I'm going to turn this over to you, and I'm having some video issues here. I don't know if you guys can, if I look any different to you, but you guys look a lot different to me. So, Kat, if you could please take over for the Q&A part. Thank you.
It's got to be the weather, Dennis. So thanks everybody for your attention during that portion, and obviously a big thank you to our presenters for running us through all of that information. So we have received a few questions throughout the webinar on varied topics. I'm just going to run through them one by one, and our presenters will address them. So folks, if anything else springs to mind, do feel free to just continue typing those into the chat box, and we will get to them. So the first thing, actually, Jim, this is probably for you. It's a comment that was made, but I think it could be a good point of discussion, so I'll just read it. With dual power inputs like we have, the managed power option is hard to make work.
So I'll be curious, the person that typed that in, if they can give us a little bit more feedback on that. But usually we will look for dual circuits when you're providing power into a rack. That's fairly common. That's a best practice right away, so that if you do lose a circuit, half your power supplies in your servers are on that one. The other half of the power supplies are in the redundant circuit. Again, with managed PDUs, you could have a managed PDU on each circuit. You would just need to make sure that you document properly, server 1, its first power supply is an outlet 1 on this PDU, and it's an outlet 2 or 3 on this other PDU, so that when you go to actually reset that device, you get both outlets. But you should be able to do that. It's just going to be one extra step because you're going to have 2 circuits to deal with, as opposed to if everybody just used 1 circuit.
Perfect, thanks, Jim. And just a note for this comment and for all of them, if you feel that you want a little bit more detail on an answer to your question, or even would like to review with our experts, specific to your environment, do feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We'll set something up for you so that you get all the information you're looking for. So the next question here, guys, on VDI. So outside of the connectivity over VDI, what are your suggestions for a purpose-built VPN that is separate from your production internet traffic filtering firewalls? It was a mouthful. I can repeat it if needed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One more time.
Sure, Al. Here goes. Outside the connectivity over VDI, what are your suggestions for a purpose-built VPN that is separate from your production internet traffic filtering firewalls?
Okay. So a long time ago, we took the building block approach, right? We built everything in silos, and then we kind of connected the silos together. Moving forward, we said, hey, let's unify the network, right? Make everything converged. Nowadays, I'm not necessarily stating it's better, right, to build a standalone VPN solution, but what's the use case and what's the desired outcome here? It might be easier for you to manage and know or have better visibility of where that traffic is coming from, right? How to secure it, how to ensure that it stays off of the production network, right? There's a lot of pros and cons there. I'd say it depends on the organization. What's your security policy? The financial industry, right? You're going to have tighter security policies than a business that specializes in swimming pool maintenance, right? So, what's the use case? What's the desired outcome?
Perfect. Al, I think we're probably going to stick with you for this next question as well. It's a little bit along the same lines. So it reads, we'd love to go 100% VDI, but it seems near impossible with some users requiring custom apps for specific purposes, and the fact that video conferencing, i.e. MS Teams, doesn't seem to perform as well in VDI. So the question is it possible to get to a perfect world of 100% VDI for consistency and scalability while still allowing some flexibility?
So I'll probably take that one, Kat. That actually lands a little bit more for me than for Al. So yeah, you actually can do one-off desktops in VDI. It's not as efficient, right? The main benefit of VDI always was the remote access, but along with that came scalability and management. So managing more on the concept of a pool where I don't have individual desktops for users, but I sort of have the same applications installed that I can reuse machines in that pool for multiple users, right? I know that the person that's probably writing this in is saying, well, yeah, that's great, but we've got some users that have individual apps that nobody else has, and we'd rather not give those apps to everyone. So there are a number of advancements that have been made in VDI over the past few years. We happen to use VMware's Horizon product. There are ways within Horizon to take a standard pooled desktop image, but connect unique specialized applications on a user-by-user basis to that image. So it's a little bit more of an advanced deployment, but it can be done. As far as some of those video conferencing apps, you want to look into those apps, right? Because yeah, they're not always the best through a virtual environment. However, many of those vendors understand that the world has shifted a lot to VDI, and there are specific things that they have done to their applications to make them work better in VDI. So, for example, we use WebEx Teams a lot. WebEx Teams, there is a specific setup that you can do. That a portion of that setup is done in the VDI pool image that the administrator maintains. And then there's a little piece of software that goes onto the endpoint where the client's going to connect from. So this could be your end user's home PC, for example. And it helps with the performance, or sometimes what we call the hairpinning of turning the data around in a circle. So, for WebEx Teams, for Skype, there are solutions that will make these things work better in VDI. Microsoft Teams, it's sort of the follow-on to Skype, still a little bit newer. I have not seen any optimizations around Teams as of yet, but I'm sure they're going to come just based on the prevalence of how people have moved to Teams and Zoom and things during this whole crisis. But yeah, we can probably tackle, if it's not 100%, probably 90-95% of your end user application issues in VDI now. So hopefully it gets you most of the way across the finish line.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. Moving right along here, let's see. Okay. Here's a very important question. To Al, how did Al get a haircut when all the salons are shut down?
So a really good friend of mine has his own barber shop, and he tends to take Fridays off, you know, more often than not. So yeah, I got a little upset one day and said, you know what, I'm going to cut my own hair from now on. Now, fast forward 10 years, I've been fading my own for about 10. So not visiting the salon, got a triple mirror in the bathroom, you know, keep it tight, nice and short, easy to do. Highly recommend testing it out on your own.
Well, Al, maybe that'll be our next webinar then. You can show us all how it's done.
Haircutting videos, you got it.
Okay. On a serious note, our next question here is a little bit of a setup, so I'll read it out here. In our organization, our patch management and AV applications can reach the endpoints even if they aren't on network/VPN. What can be done outside of the virus scanning and ensuring patches are applied and updates to date to ensure a device is sanitized before it is plugged back into the internal network?
All right, I'm going to hop on there. So, okay, updates are reaching the endpoints with or without VPN. Perfect. Definitely ideal for the situation. Now, how can we ensure that the device is sanitized before it comes back? So I guess it depends on the definition of sanitized, right? Couple of things come to mind though. So, you know, continuous monitoring. Let's say, you know, something malicious got onto the machine, it got past the AV, you know, heaven forbid, opened up, you know, a listening port that was a backdoor installed on the computer, right? Continuous monitoring from an agent is going to pick up on this. It's going to report back to your console, say, hey, there's a new TCP port, you know, 655, whatever, just spun up on the machine. You should look into this. File integrity monitoring. You could monitor all the files on the system, right, and comparing the hash values. Typically, this is done more on the server side of the house than it would be on an endpoint, but definitely, you know, another option. Insider threat solutions, right? There's full-blown solutions that can actually record all of the desktop activity and kind of send small bits and pieces of metadata, you know, to a console. They have AI engines, you know, they detect risky behavior, and once that behavior is detected, it actually elevates them right on the console for you. So, you know, if there's something going on, you can look into it. Some of those solutions are really slick. They even can get down to the point where they're actually video recording the desktop, you know, once that threat level starts to get to an 8 or a 9. So, yeah, a lot of different ways to skin a cat there. That's just what immediately comes to mind. You know, outside of traditionally, you know, we know we're patched, we're up to date, and the AV scanning looks good.
Perfect, thanks, Al. We have a follow-up from the same attendee here, which I assume is related, although maybe not. The question is, product plug for an insider threat solution?
I'm sorry?
Is there a product that you'd like to speak to for an insider threat solution?
Yeah, you know, try to keep it simple. There's Observe It is one that I'm really fond of. So when I talk about the metadata and also the video recording, it's a very unique product. I haven't found anything similar just yet. Awesome. Definitely something to look into.
Great. We also have a follow-up here, Jim, from that first question that was asked. So I'll just review that quickly. The question was, or rather the comment was, that with dual power inputs like this user has, the managed power option was hard to make work. So a follow-up to that here. The comment is, our config has street power on unit 1 via a UPS or UPS, I assume, and the second one comes in on a generator.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. Again, we see a lot of folks that do that. You know, usually the generator, you're still going to have a UPS on there as well, because the gen set does take a few seconds to spin up when there is a power failure. But I'm guessing that they've sized their UPS big enough that, you know, when there is a power failure, the one on the street power is able to hold everything running while the generator spins up. But But again, usually the feed would be, either street power or UPS. Street power or generator coming into a UPS, and then distributing off the UPS would be the PDUs. So if you don't have the PDU option, that might be why the challenge is there. Some UPSs do have the ability to toggle specific outlets on and off, but usually the outlets on the UPS are, a larger wattage, larger amperage that's designed to feed a PDU. So knocking off one of those outlets usually knocks off a lot of equipment, not just one individual piece. So, but yeah, you should definitely still be able to do it, but kind of, walk the power tree in and see if you don't have the PDUs, that might be the piece that you want to bring into the environment to give you that flexibility to turn things on and off on an outlet by outlet basis.
And then a quick follow-up to that, Jim. Question is, do they need 2 MPDUs?
I would definitely have, separate PDUs for the separate circuits. And again, both of them being switched and managed. So that gives you the greatest flexibility. Yes, it is the most expensive way to go. But, if you don't have them both on separate PDUs, you've taken your redundant feed and brought it down to a single point of failure. And if you do have it on separate PDUs, but one is managed and one is basic, you're not going to be able to cut the power on the one that's basic. So again, you sort of halfway met the solution criteria. Best bet would be 2 separate PDUs, 1 per circuit, and that both sets of those PDUs be a managed and switched option.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. And again, to our attendees, if there's any specific subject for your environment that you really would like the guys to drill down into, we are more than happy to answer some of those questions after the fact and get a little bit more specific with your situation. Guys, I'd love to end on a couple of general questions here from my end, although folks, if you have anything else, obviously continue to feed those into the chat. So again, just general questions here. Is it possible to have sort of an emergency checklist in place in case that a crisis like this would happen again, or something completely different like a natural disaster, or does it really have to be on a case-by-case basis?
I'll jump in real quick and then I'll let the other guys chime in too. But I think you can easily put together a document for something, very similar to this type of event, right? We did this internally here at IntegraONE. We were getting ready to send everyone home. We made sure that we put a document out to all the employees that listed, here's all the different things that are available remotely to you. Here's how you access those things. Here's what you'll be able to do. Here's what you won't be able to do. Here's the people that you want to contact if you try to attempt one of these remote access technologies and you're having difficulty. So a simple contact list, a simple, what's available list, that's something that you should have available in your organization day in and day out, regardless of, a work from home, non-work from home type of an environment. And it's not something that takes a real long time to put together. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. And then one more general one here, guys. So if you want to speak to in your different areas, what are going to be the most sought after skill sets that we learned are really needed through this crisis?
I'll chime in here first. Disaster planning, right? Kind of going back to the other question, with or without COVID-19, right? Use this as a training exercise. What was the impact to the business? Did the wheels keep spinning? Were we a well-oiled machine? Is there something to work on? I think that'll kind of, highlight whether or not we need to beef up on, additional training and resources too. So I think they kind of go hand in hand with one another. Technology is great. It allows us to do, many things, and especially on the fly. With a lot of clients, we haven't had horror stories. If anything, we were, up in capacity, layering on more security on top. But for the most part, it's been pretty easy going, with additions and whatnot. But sorry, I didn't mean to get off in left field there. I just thought the two kind of went hand in hand.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And I would say from my side, if you're not already running VDI, you're probably going to be considering doing it, I would think, or some sort of a solution, but VDI is pretty much the easiest. So we've got a lot of customers that were calling us asking, what does this look like? What do I need to do it? Whether it's on-prem or cloud hosted. It's something that's gained a lot of traction because it made it very easy to pivot and work from anywhere.
Perfect. So folks, again, if there are any questions that pop up after the fact that you want to ask our presenters or would like to, just dive a little bit deeper into, do feel free to reach out to us. On that note, I'm just going to review our quick housekeeping items, although I know we've already sort of spoken to some of this at the beginning. All right. So once more, you can please fill out our feedback survey, which will really help us when we're hosting future webinars to know what you might be interested in learning from our team of experts. And that's a good way also to add any questions that you might have or even request a meeting with our panelists. Again, we have that part 2 webinar, an Encore presentation of that. It is a live Encore presentation, which will be more networking focused. That is on Wednesday, the 13th, coming up. So if you'd like to register for that or see any of the other events that we might have in the future, IntegraONE.com/events is the place. So on that note, I want to say a big thank you to everyone for your attention and for your questions today. Presenters, thank you for all the valuable information. I suppose on a parting note, stay safe, everyone, stay healthy. Hope you're able to enjoy the nice weather here that we have coming up, although not today.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kat.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.